Thank you, everybody, for participating in Capitol Hill Oceans Week, our remote chow in the midst of the coronavirus. It's great that you're participating. We have some bad news and we have some good news. I think you know the bad news. The ocean is warming at an unprecedented rate as 90% of our added heat from climate change gets absorbed by the oceans. Our oceans are acidifying at the fastest rate in 50 million years, as 30% of the excess carbon dioxide gets absorbed by the ocean and chemically alters them. And we're loading up the oceans with plastic at a rate that will put more plastic than fish in the oceans by weight by 2050. That's pretty rough news. But the good news is some real bipartisanship has emerged in the Senate on these issues. Whether it was Save Our Seas, or Save Our Seas 2.0, or Blue Globe, or Sea Fuel, over and over again, we have real good bipartisan progress coming together. Now, all that is a start, a beachhead, if you will. We have lots more to do. So let's get together and take advantage of this good start and get to work on those bad problems. Thanks so much.
Hello and virtual greetings from Washington, D.C. as we kick off this year's Capitol Hill Ocean Week. Chow is a highlight every summer, and it serves as a valuable chance to focus congressional discussions and attention on our oceans. With the challenges brought to us by COVID-19, we are fortunate to have a virtual environment where we can continue productive conversations on the long-term health of our oceans. Today's panels will highlight how critical cooperation and collaboration are when monitoring change and facing challenges at the scale of our global oceans. This is so important. No nation or entity on its own can comprehensively monitor the marine environment and its biodiversity. Nor can they solve global issues like increasing ocean temperatures, ocean acidification, marine plastic pollution, and IUU fishing. Senator Whitehouse and I established the Senate Oceans Caucus back in 2011 to build partnerships in Congress to help meet just these challenges. We initially identified 3 priorities: IUU fishing, marine debris, and ocean data. And I'm proud to say that we've made significant progress through bipartisan legislation on all 3 of these fronts. And our work continues. I'm really excited about our ocean data-focused Blue Globe legislation, which will strengthen interagency management of ocean data and promote the development of next-generation ocean observing platforms and strategies. Pandemic aside, we're working to get that legislation completed this Congress. Senator Whitehouse and I are also working on legislation to bolster blue carbon, to understand, protect, and expand marine ecosystems that sequester carbon and protect shorelines. Another top priority of mine is providing support for marine science through my role on the Senate Appropriations Committee. Last year, we were successful in securing funding increases for key programs to help us better understand the oceans and the changes that they're experiencing. I was successful in boosting funding for Sea Grant, additional resources for the Integrated Ocean Acidification Program, plus-ups for NOAA's fishery surveys, the Integrated Ocean Observing System, National Estuarian Research Reserves, as well as the National Science Foundation. Strong international collaborations enhance what we can do through marine science. Alaskans are well aware of the importance of working together on these topics as we engage in many international treaties, agreements, and partnerships to study and manage our marine resources, especially in the Arctic. Alaska's kind of out there on its own in the North Pacific, hundreds of miles away from our closest neighboring state, surrounded by international borders on both land and sea. And our unique position in the far north means that we have some unique relationships across those borders. Cooperation with our Russian and Canadian neighbors helps us protect the valuable diversity of our world-class fisheries and marine ecosystems. International collaborations on marine mammal monitoring and research helps us track populations that are of great cultural importance to indigenous communities, as well as a powerful draw for Alaska tourism. The Arctic has been a sphere for cooperation across borders on marine science, ocean observations, and issues like seafloor mapping and Arctic shipping safety. As we see rapid changes occur in the Arctic, there is enormous potential to achieve more through continued collaboration, data sharing, and international research partnerships. So I want to thank you for bringing together a panel that can highlight the importance of strong cooperation to better understand and conserve our oceans. We so appreciate all that so many of you do. Take care.
Hello, and welcome to Capitol Hill Oceans Week. I'm Marcia McNutt. I'm president of the National Academy of Sciences, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator for today's panel. And the title of today's panel is Cooperating on Our Global Ocean. And in keeping with today's theme on biodiversity, there can be no better topic for which we need to cooperate than on biodiversity. In thinking about today's panel, I remembered back to the financial collapse in 2008, which affected the entire globe. At that time, there was a term that I think was used for the first time during that financial collapse, and it was too big to fail. If there was ever a system that is too big to fail, it is our global ocean. We depend on our ocean for the air we breathe, for the food we eat, for moderating our climate, for novel drugs and other novel materials. The ocean is integral to life itself on this planet. And therefore, it is so important that we cooperate among nations, across different sectors of the economy, and across scientific disciplines to make sure that the ocean does not fail us now. And I am pleased to be joined by a very distinguished panel today in order to discuss what we are doing to cooperate in order to preserve and understand the biodiversity in the global ocean. I would like each of the panelists to take a few minutes to introduce himself or herself and the institution they represent. I will first ask Vidar Helgeson, who is the special representative for the oceans from the nation of Norway, to begin. Vidar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marcia. It's a pleasure to be on this panel, and I look forward to the discussion on a topic that is incredibly important, but that many countries don't really understand or sees the depth of in terms of the challenges and in terms of the opportunities. Many countries, even with big oceans, have their back to the ocean. We're all quite terrestrial because we live there, but the ocean means so much. So putting the ocean on the agenda is incredibly important. That goes for, not least, the biodiversity in the ocean. So much of life on the planet is in the ocean, and we depend on that life to thrive. I work on driving a process called the High-Level Panel for a Sustainable Ocean Economy, which is a panel of 14 sitting and serving heads of state and government, chaired by my Prime Minister, Erna Solberg, and the President of Palau, Tommy Remengesau. Together with other leaders from all over the world, they have commissioned cutting-edge research into essentially all ocean issues, and will be coming up with a major report, scientific report, and policy recommendations. Initially, that was supposed to take place on the eve of the UN Ocean Conference in June this year. That will now be postponed, but the work continues to see how we can both protect the ocean and the ocean riches in order to produce more from the ocean, because we do need to produce more from the ocean. We know that ecosystems are interlinked, they're complex, there are interrelationships there that we don't even oversee. The pressures on those ecosystems are growing, and they're also interlinked. There's pollution, there's IUU fishing, there is climate change, and these things interact. And human and economic activity in the ocean and by the ocean is increasing, and in many ways needs to increase in order to feed a growing population. And because this multiplicity of impacts on the ocean is so complex, there's no other way of addressing ocean issues than to do it in an integrated way, trying to see the ocean as a whole and human interaction with the ocean as a whole. And that's a very, very important part of what this high-level panel is up to. How can countries manage their oceans better? And we see that as something that is good for nature, because we need to build on ecosystems knowledge, good for governments, because governments need to plan across sectors and have a holistic grip on things, and not least, good for business. Business need predictability. And we hear a call now from ocean businesses and ocean industries that want to make better use of the ocean, that they depend on governments to lay frameworks, provide clarity. Where can we put our offshore wind parks? Where should we protect? Where should we produce? And that predictability is something that governments should ensure and work in close partnership with businesses to achieve that protection agenda, production agenda, and in what would effectively then be also a prosperity agenda for people living from the ocean around the world.
Thank you much, Vidar. I'm sure we can all get behind those goals. Okay, next, I'd like to invite Dr. Margaret Lin, who's the director of Scripps Institution of Oceanography and also Vice Chancellor at University of California, San Diego. Margaret?
Great, thank you, Marcia. Let me share my screen here. Marcia asked me to tell you a little bit about Scripps Institution of Oceanography. We're a part of the University of California at San Diego, and we work to understand and protect the planet, and especially, as Vidar emphasized, the ocean is such a dominant force on the planet that we need to investigate that, the earth, the atmosphere, to find solutions to our greatest environmental challenges, and the ocean touches them all. I think that in recent years, we've understood that we need to go far beyond a basic understanding of the ocean to really get at the vexing challenges that are out there for us. And at Scripps, we're very focused on not only basic research, but also the solution science that helps us understand big issues like climate change impacts and adaptation, human health and how it's impacted by the ocean, our resilience to hazards that are around the ocean, in the ocean, harmful algal blooms, tsunamis, conservation and biodiversity, and the challenge of understanding biodiversity and how it is being affected by all of these, by all of the both natural and anthropogenic threats. Polar science has taken a much bigger role in the oceans today as we understand how quickly they're changing and how little we know about them right now. Innovative technology is necessary to understand the ocean and to be able to look at how it's changing. Sometimes that innovative technology is put together into large ocean observing systems, whether those are satellites or whether they're constellations of sensors in the ocean. And they give us a persistent and a global view of the ocean. And then finally, I think that all oceanographic institutions now realize that public understanding of the ocean has to be part of our mission. At Scripps, we're involved in many partnerships to reach out to the public, whether it's to school children, whether it's to governments, whether it's to business. We even operate a public aquarium that has 500,000 visitors a year. So those are really important pieces for us. Like many oceanographic institutions, we operate a fleet of oceanographic vessels that really, over the years, have visited all of the world's oceans and allow us to study the ocean from the poles to the equator, from the depths of the ocean to its influence at the top of the atmosphere, even studying the potential for oceans on other planets. The Scripps Institution of Oceanography is a large organization. There are about 2,300 people who come to work every day on the campus and generate a lot of excitement to be able to look at this wide array of topics. We offer academic programs in marine biology, the ocean and atmosphere, environmental systems, and earth science, whether that's at the undergraduate level, the master's, the PhD, or specialized courses. For example, a one-year master's in conservation and a one-year master's in climate change and policy. So this is just a brief introduction, and I think that it's reflective of a lot of the oceanographic institutions around the world now, moving from just understanding the ocean to being able to deliver the kinds of science that will allow us to solve the huge problems that we face and to feed into the important work of policymakers such as that Vidal described. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Margaret, for that great introduction to Scripps. Next, I'd like Dr. Carlos Duarte, who's a professor at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, better known as KAUST, in Saudi Arabia, to introduce himself and his institution. Carlos?
Thank you, Marcia. So I'm delighted to share this panel with you and tell you a bit about my research and my current organization. So I am a Spanish citizen and I've been working on marine ecology for about 35 years in every ocean, mostly based in Europe and working in Spain and institutions in Norway and Denmark. And then from Europe, I moved to Australia. And on the last 6 years, then I've been working in Saudi Arabia. But I have also strong links and friends and colleagues in the US, where I was honored to be president of the American Society of Limnology and Oceanography, that is the largest professional society in marine sciences for 3 years. And most of my research has been about documenting impacts of human pressures on the ocean. But about 10 years ago, then I took a different route and I started to work on solutions towards mitigating those pressures. And I engaged broadly with engineers, architects, and people from other trades to see how we devise solutions to those problems. But I also realized that the ocean is a source of solutions for humanity's grand challenge. So now we're working on developing and delivering those solutions. My institution, KAUST, is located on the shores of the Red Sea. It's a very young institution, only 11-year-old, and it is a research-intensive postgraduate university. And it hosts an international community of about 7,000 people that work and live at KAUST. And we come from 118 nationalities. So I haven't seen any institution that is as international at KAUST, and therefore we care strongly about the whole planet, and we work towards problems that are of planetary significance. So the vision of KAUST is be inspired by discoveries to address global challenges, and we hope to be a beacon of knowledge that bridges peoples and cultures for the betterment of humanity. And our mission focused on 4 areas where we feel the greatest challenges of humanity are based, which are food, water, environment, and energy. And as I mentioned, we focus on how the oceans can be a solution for humanity's grand challenges in those 4 areas. And in fact, I also serve in the expert group that supports the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy that my colleague Vidar introduced. And the ocean is a source of food and a growing source of food for humanity through sustainable aquaculture. Aquaculture is the fastest growing food sector in the world, growing at about 8% per year, and is called to be the source of healthy and sustainable food for humanity in the decades to come. In Saudi Arabia, all of the water we consume comes from the ocean, but we work on rendering desalination a sustainable industry, both in terms of energy sources, but also in terms of avoiding impacts on the environment. We also work to harness the energy that the ocean can deliver to society in renewable forms, but also the role of marine ecosystems as carbon sinks to mitigate climate change and achieve climate stability. And we're looking at the global ocean genome as a source of tools to resolve many problems in all of these sectors. And lastly, we are committed to work towards be able to deliver a healthy and resilient ocean ecosystem, not only to ourselves, but to our future generations. And that is the area where I'm devoting most of my work at present. So I think that introduces my organization. And because we're such an international community, then global partnerships and collaborations are key to ourselves. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Carlos. Next, it's my pleasure to ask Dr. Sara Bender, who's a program officer in Symbiosis in Aquatic Systems Initiative at the Moore Foundation. Sara, please introduce yourself and your program at the Moore Foundation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. So I'm pleased to join the panel also as a card-carrying biological oceanographer. I have spent my career exploring the ocean from time at sea to my current role as a program officer at the Moore Foundation. And I have since expanded my work to include terrestrial biomes as well. I'm interested in the biology that underlies our connections and interactions with our planet. And the common thread throughout my career has been recognition of the importance of the fundamental understanding of our natural world. So who is there? What are they doing to inform management and conservation decisions? When I was conducting research, my work focused on understanding the role of marine microbes in driving biogeochemical cycles, and I used emerging technologies such as metaomics to do that work. So following a postdoctoral appointment at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, I pivoted from work in the lab to philanthropy with the goal of enabling high-impact discovery-based research and to support the scientists, the incredible scientists that are working at the frontiers of these different disciplines. So as you mentioned, I work in the science program at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, where our collective work is focused on advancing basic science through developing new technologies, supporting the scientists, and creating new collaborations at the frontiers of traditional scientific disciplines. Much of my time is spent in our Marine Microbiology Initiative, as well as in our Symbiosis in Aquatic Systems Initiative. These are both multi-year board-approved efforts. The Marine Microbiology Initiative is winding down. That was really focused on the interactions among marine microbes and how that impacted planetary cycles. And then our Symbiosis in Aquatic Systems Initiative, which is ramping up, and that's focused on the role of marine microbes and how they interact with other organisms, both in marine and in freshwater systems. I also co-manage our Moore Inventor Fellows program, which provides support to scientist inventors to get their tools and technologies out of the lab and into the public space to do good and make an impact in one of our foundation's programmatic areas. And I co-manage a portfolio of projects that rests at the intersection of science and conservation with a focus again on biodiversity monitoring. So thank you so much again. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, Sara. Thank you very much. And next of our distinguished panel to introduce himself is Dr. Neil Hammerschlag, who is a research associate professor and the director of the Shark Research and Conservation Program at the University of Miami. Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marcia, and the rest of the panel. Thanks for the introduction. Again, my name is Neil Hammerschlag, and just to give you a brief introduction of about who I am and where I work. So I am based at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, with an co-appointment at the Abbott Center for Ecosystem Science and Policy, where I work with a great group of people studying the atmosphere, the oceans, and the policy implications of that work. I'm also the director of the Shark Research and Conservation Program, where our goal is to do cutting-edge research centered on the conservation biology of sharks, and also communicating that with the public, particularly through hands-on opportunities for actually school children in marine biology. And I'm a co-investigator with the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network in South Florida. And our goal is to assess and monitor biodiversity through various different techniques, including work with eDNA, fish sampling, using remotely sensed data on ocean essential variables, and animal tracking, and even measuring ambient sound and biological and anthropogenic sound in the oceans. And and that work is really relevant to this overall theme of the conference on conserving biodiversity, because we're trying to understand how biodiversity, where are biodiversity hotspots, and how are those changing over time, and what does that mean for protecting biodiversity. Personally, my research centers on the behavioral ecology and conservation biology of highly migratory species under global change, such as urbanization, warming seas, as well as overfishing. My research, however, the species I focus on are top predators, particularly sharks. And this is important because these marine top predators are particularly sensitive to climate and ecosystem change, given that, you know, they're wide ranging and can move over very large areas, linking different areas. And because they live near at the top of the food web, they integrate information from the bottom to the top. They're also particularly vulnerable to anthropogenic change, given life history characteristics such as late age of maturity, slow growth, and as well having relatively few young and long life. So as part of my research, my overall kind of research program really has several key focus areas. The first is studying the movement and habitat use of marine predators, looking at their physiology and morphology, and also their relationships within the whole ecosystem, where they fit in the food web, and how these marine predators control other species in the food web. But really the key to the work is understanding how different human threats such as fishing influence these patterns, ecotourism, urbanization, and ultimately climate variability and change influences ecological processes, and ultimately how we can take this information to better understand these animals and to conserve them and conserve biodiversity. So I'm really excited to tell you about several ways in which I've been able to leverage working and collaborating with various other organizations, groups, management, and researchers to aid in conserving biodiversity through the different research projects that I'm doing. And it's a pleasure to speak here on this panel today. And with that, I thank you very much.
All right, wonderful, Neil. We'll look forward to hearing more about all these great projects you've got going. And I love that you mentioned getting school children involved in hands-on work while you were embracing that shark. I'm sure that's going to entice lots of young people to want to become marine biologists. So thank you for that. All right, now we're going to go into some lightning round questions. So let's start with question number one. If anyone would like to share an example of a partnership that you were involved in, or your organization, that was particularly successful, and I'd like you to particularly share with us what made it successful. And Sara, would you please maybe go first on this one?
Sure, yep. So we're gonna go from large charismatic sharks down to the microbes again. And I'm going to bring us back to the More Foundation's Marine Microbiology Initiative. So this is a 15-year initiative where we focus in part on biodiversity in marine microbes. So as I mentioned earlier, the who is there, the what are they doing? And we did this by supporting an international community of scientists. And when we were just starting to outline the contours of this initiative in the early 2000s, we realized that it would be really helpful to build some purpose-built reference databases. And so in the end, I'll cut to the take home, what I want you to take away, and then I can provide just a little more information. But the idea was that this purpose-built reference databases could serve as a launch point for scientists to interrogate and to explore and to address questions of interest. And that could include tracking and monitoring biodiversity. But first we had to figure out who was there. So from this, I really would like to emphasize that these purpose-built reference databases could bring the benefits of data. They could bring the benefits of the tools, development of tools needed to analyze these data sets, new technologies, and then ideas spurred from this in the fundamental research space that can then lead to broader questions in conservation. And so just briefly, in the interest of time, so in 2004, we provided support to Craig Venter as part of the Global Ocean Sampling Expedition. So this was when it was kind of the new era of sequencing and sequencing the oceans. They had just published their seminal paper in Science where they showed how little we knew about which microbes were there, the diversity of genes out there, and we provided additional support for them to expand the ecologically relevant biomes where they were doing their work. This supported what was at the time cutting edge sequencing technologies, so shotgun sequencing to generate these metagenomes. And again, the goal was to understand the diversity of genes and microbes in the ocean. And by microbes, I mean everything from viruses to bacteria, microbial eukaryotes, and even archaea. So to your question, Marcia, about why this was successful, one, our funding came in and kind of built on a much broader effort. Funding also came in from the Department of Energy, and this leveraged ship time on the Sorcerer 2. The data was made available to the community after a period of time and is still in use today. It was one of the first, if not the first, efforts to really start exploring what was out there in terms of the microbes. And then one could argue that this kicked off some of the other large-scale ocean sampling expeditions. So Tara Oceans, or we have Carlos on the panel, Malaspina. And so what I think was just critical to the success of all of these is community engagement, identifying the gaps and the needs, bringing in advisory panels, and creating something that was really of interest. And again, this notion of a purpose-built reference data set, you then have the foundation, and then you can start asking some of these more broad questions.
Great, Sara. That was a wonderful example. Okay, Vidar, I'll turn to you next. Do you have an example?
Well, since I do represent a government, maybe I should go from the low trophic example to a high politics example. I'd like to highlight the joint fisheries collaboration between Norway and Russia, which has been in existence ever since Russia was the Soviet Union. It's now been 45 years. Norway at that time was the only NATO member bordering on the Soviet Union. As you can imagine, it's a challenging neighborly relationship. But the two countries agreed and has sustained through political ups and downs throughout all these years, a collaboration and a joint commission on fisheries science and fisheries management, ensuring over time that harvesting of fisheries in the Arctic is sustainable. And I think in terms of a partnership that has been remarkable, despite a lot of tensions on other fronts. That is one, I was about to say for the history books, but it's still going on and still thriving. So it's something that proves that sustainability can be a shared objective and can be a shared practice between governments throughout challenging times. I think a commitment by both states to base their collaboration on science and base their quotas and their fisheries policies on science, to agree that we build trust if we base ourselves on science. And in that way, we can both have thriving fisheries industries that are sustainable and that know that even if there might be disappointment with the quotas this year, they will be better next year, because sustainability is about enabling nature to regenerate. So it's been good for the politics of the countries and good for businesses in both countries.
Perfect. Great. All right, Carlos, next. Let's turn to you.
Thank you, Marcia. So maybe before I share a current story, I would like to maybe add to Vidar's, because the success of the partnership between Norway and Russia in managing fish stock has reached really important textbook milestones. And the cod stock in the Arctic, through the management of Russia and Norway, reached already some years ago a level that was beyond baseline. And it was beyond baseline because of the good management practice, but also because climate change in the Arctic was opening new grounds for cod to use. But without sound management, that opportunity would not have been used. So now the Arctic enjoys the largest and the strongest cod stock anywhere in the ocean. And that partnership is not only just about fish stocks, because I was an adjunct professor at the University of Tromsø in the Norwegian Arctic. And we, through that partnership, we established very close working relationships with scientists in Russia that have been essential in providing observations and details about changes in the Arctic, as Russia covers about maybe 30 to 40% of the Arctic. So that has been a very important partnership for Arctic science, even beyond fisheries. But I wanted to share a very new partnership that has to do with us not being present in person in Capitol Hill, but being in small quadrants in the screen. And that's the current COVID predicament that we find ourselves in. And then one would think that being confined in our own homes, away from labs and away from conferences, will be possibly the hardest situation to nurture partnerships. But in fact, we found that that has brought a strong desire to work together and has shortened and shrink distances. Because for me now, it's as easy to work with someone in the US or someone in Australia as it is to work with someone just in the same campus, because we are confined at home. So as we became confined, and by April 5, there were 0.6 billion humans confined in their homes globally, then we realized that wildlife started to show some unusual behaviors. And then we realized that now it's humans that are confined, but over decades, it's been wildlife that have been confined in smaller and smaller parcels of ocean and land. So we launched an initiative called Pan Environment, and in fact, Neil is one of the participants in the initiative, where we are using this global confinement as a large experiment to assess what is the influence of human presence in the oceans and land on wildlife and ecosystems. So very rapidly, we grew a network of hundreds of institutions and scientists around the world that are very happy to share data, because all of us have a desire to work together and contribute, but also we realize this is a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity to assess the impacts of human presence. And we are discovering both positive and negative impacts. Some of them are really unexpected. For instance, right now, because of the decline in oil use and energy use and price of oil, then the number of super tankers in the ocean loaded with holding oil has grown more than 6 times. So the risks for oil spills and dangers to the ocean are greater than ever. So that's one unexpected negative outcome. But we're seeing the ocean going quiet and a strong recruitment in many species, for instance, sea turtles, that beyond the transient effect that we hope our confinement will have on our lives, then many of these endangered animals are going to experience long-term benefits from these small experiments. And hopefully we learn how to share our planets with wildlife and other creatures that we share the planet with.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please, Sara, jump in.
Carlos, I'm curious who some of the partners are that are involved in this effort, and I was wondering if the International Biologging Society is connected to your work.
Yeah, so International Biologging Society, through Christian Rutz, that is the president, is connected to our network. And so they have made a call to their members. It's about 800 members in that society to contribute their observations to add them to grow this vision. But we're also working with UNESCO and the managers of the World Heritage Sites, both on land and the ocean, to understand what observations are they collecting, but also what impacts this has on conservation. Because guards and conservation managers are also confined, and we're seeing a growth of poaching and illegal fishing in many protected areas. And also US National Parks is also a partner that are contributing important observations from their networks. So altogether, we're probably about more than 200 institutions now distributed globally. So really, really an important partnership that has grown organically within only 2-3 weeks.
So, just a minute, Neil. So, Carlos, I'm so fascinated that the answer to the question of what facilitated the success of your project, it was a global pandemic to lock up all the humans that facilitated the success of your project. Neil, you wanted to jump in.
I just wanted to say that it's such an incredible opportunity. I think that has, you can't really think about another chance we might get to do this. So it's really amazing that these people are coming together to answer this question. And I mean, you don't really know the outcome, but it's like, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, and the level of collaboration that is happening worldwide is really an amazing effort and a great example of I think, this cooperation and partnership.
Yeah, if I may add just one last comment. There was a global group of ocean acousticians that were hoping to do something called the International Quiet Ocean Experiment. And their ambition was that nations will agree that the ocean will go quiet one day so they could assess what is the background sound of the ocean. And yet, it's not one day. We have gone quiet for more than 2 months, and they found one in a lifetime opportunity to actually test that idea, and also feedback into how to redesign our vessels and activities so that we keep the ocean quiet, because it's important for wildlife.
All right, thank you. Neil, you wanted to talk about a partnership and what made it successful.
Yeah, so one of my newest and perhaps most rewarding partnerships is with the oceanographic community that has implications for conservation of threatened species, for sustainable fisheries, and mitigating threats from climate change to us, on humans and society. So as we're learning from this whole conference is that, climate change and variability presents significant challenges to both biodiversity and society. So understanding the effects of changing ocean temperatures on marine ecosystems is a research priority. The thing is, in order to adequately monitor and predict climate events that are related to, that impact species in the oceans and humans, we need to have really good high resolution temperature data from the oceans, not only at the surface, but throughout the water column. A big problem with that is actually getting high resolution temperature at varying depths, because for the most part, we rely on satellites to get temperature information, which can only get it from the surface at relatively low spatial accuracy. And then we can obviously put units and tools in the water column to measure, the temperature at different depths, but that's limited because most vessels or instruments that we put in the ocean can only be there for short amount of time and relatively close to shore. So there's a gap in terms of getting data throughout the water column, especially at deep depths and really far away from shore. So where does that come in? Well, my research includes satellite tracking sharks in order to study their movements and identify hotspots in place and time that are critical for their mating, their giving birth, feeding sites, and also to see where they're vulnerable to fishing. And the idea is to prioritize these spots, these hotspots, for conserving, threatened shark species. However, these tags also have temperature sensors on them that we use to look to measure the ocean temperatures wherever the sharks are going, to better understand how these sharks are responding to ocean temperatures. However, I've started this collaboration with an oceanographer from my university, Dr. Ben Kurtman, who has modeling efforts to use temperature data mainly from satellites in order to predict climate. And this climate includes things like rainfall, sea level rise, flooding events in both real time and in the future, and to predict things like coastal flooding. And the thing is, one of the limitations for him is getting high resolution temperature data. So our collaboration actually involves getting the temperature data from the shark tags that I've deployed to better inform his climate models. So essentially this partnership involves me going out and studying sharks and understanding their movements and how they're influenced by temperature. But in addition, we are getting that temperature data that the sharks are collecting in near real time that's being transmitted through satellites that now are being used in these climate models to forecast things like sea level rise or rainfall or coastal flooding, which are threats to society. So we are, as a society, we're actually benefiting from the data being generated from these tagged animals in ways that we haven't before. And the beauty of this is that these sharks aren't constrained by anything. They can go to the deepest depths, they can go the furthest from shore. So they're actually collecting data that's valuable for monitoring climate just by doing their thing. And that it's transmitting that data in real time and filling gaps that, in terms of measuring ocean temperatures, that isn't available right now through some of the traditional ocean monitoring tools. So this is providing information that's valuable for understanding the drivers of the movements of threatened sharks. It's valuable for understanding sustainable fisheries and how to identify essential fish habitat for monitoring and better management of sharks and other species that use the same temperature regimes in the ocean. And now we're also using this for climate models to understand how climatic events are impacting society. And so that's been a really successful collaboration. And I guess one of the reasons that it is successful is because there are different expertises coming into play here, from oceanographers to marine biologists to involving the government, who are also working with these climate model systems and helping to integrate these data into tools that can be used by both marine scientists, marine biologists, and also the oceanographic community.
Okay, thank you, Neil. All right, so I'd like to get to round 2 of questions, and maybe we'll make these responses a little shorter so we can hopefully get to round 3. Round 2, we have represented on this panel funders, researchers, governments, nonprofits. We're all doing their part for ocean biodiversity, but lasting solutions for preserving marine biodiversity will need the involvement of industry. I wondered if a few of you could mention examples of successful engagement with industry. And let me call first on you, Sara. Can you give us an example of a successful collaboration with industry?
Sure. So in 2016 at the Moore Foundation, we supported an effort where we funded between our science program and our environmental conservation program. And it was to conduct a baseline survey of biodiversity in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, So this is a region between Mexico and Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean. And as part of that project, there was a biodiversity assessment focused on the western region of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, which had not been surveyed as much as the eastern side. And then there was a requisite synthesis workshop where we wanted to bring together those stakeholders that you mentioned and include industry and include folks from the mining industry. And so the Clarion-Clipperton Zone has, through the International Seabed Authority, given out several exploratory permits for potential manganese nodule mining in the region. And so that was kind of the underlying motivation with this project. So the goals, again, biodiversity assessment, understanding connectivity in the ecosystem, and then bringing all these stakeholders to the table. And what we were hoping to achieve was there was a set of areas of particular environmental interest, or APEIs, that were set aside by the International Seabed Authority. Those had been described in 2007, but as you can imagine, since then, a lot of data had been collected, and there was the potential to redefine and potentially even expand those. And so we wanted to have the scientists at the table, and we wanted to have the contractors at the table, who were also required to collect baseline data when they do their exploration of potential mining areas. And so just briefly, the project was led by Craig Smith at the University of Hawaii. It brought in an international cohort of scientists, and that synthesis workshop did culminate in a bunch of various representatives. So the Moore Foundation was there, Pew Charitable Trust was there, there were government representatives, the International Seabed Authority was there, and then representatives that were elected by the mining industry to come and work through the data. The synthesis report was provided to the Legal and Technical Commission at the International Seabed Authority earlier this year. It was well received, and we're waiting to see if there will be an expansion of those areas of particular environmental interest with that information. So just in summary, I would say this is an example of early engagement. Craig Smith has been involved in these conversations for decades now, and we're optimistic that it will lead to some positive changes.
That's a great example, Sara. Thank you. Carlos, I'll turn to you now.
Thank you, Marcia. So I would like to report on recent interactions that I've had with tourism developers and how this has changed my perspective on the role of the private sector in promoting a healthy ocean. So through my career, I've been working mostly with scientists and governments. And whenever I've been involved or required to or requested to provide advice on some project on coastal development is because something had gone wrong. And either a harbor or a hotel development had done some damage, and then I was called to advise on how to fix it. So that was my experience until 5 years ago, where I received the visit of a delegation of a new company set up in Saudi Arabia under the program to modernize the country and move it away from an oil-based economy. So that's called the Red Sea Development Company. And this company is set to develop a rather large area with 92 islands, the size of Belgium in the Red Sea, a pristine area for tourism. So the question that they came with was intriguing and engaged me with them, because they asked me if it was possible to develop this rather pristine area without creating any impact, and in fact, using that development to create net positive impact. So that was a very different request from those I received in the past. And then I've been working with them for 4 years, not just to ensure conservation and sustainability, but to go further. And the ambition is to create a 30% net conservation impact through the development and to exceed what will be the goals and the environmental outcomes of this area if it was declared just a national park. So this is a really ambitious goal, and it has changed my vision on what is the role that the private sector can play in driving towards a healthy ocean. And I believe that many industries that operate in the ocean now realize that it should be part of the social license to achieve a net positive conservation outcome on the areas that they work on. So I am strongly working now with industry as drivers of net positive conservation outcomes. and abandon giving away the culture of sustain and conserve to achieve a healthier ocean.
Wonderful, Carlos. Thank you so much. Let's go on to the next question. And that is, we've got lots of good news stories of partnerships that have achieved success at the local and perhaps even the regional level. But what we really need are mechanisms that allow actions to scale up, that promote stakeholders to coalesce around really big ideals so that we can achieve global goals. I'm wondering if maybe Margaret and then Vidar, you could comment on how we can scale up some of these great ideas to the global scale. So Margaret, could you go first?
Sure. I'll talk about this in the context of understanding and protecting biodiversity. We've seen this wonderful and ambitious goal 30 by 30, having 30% of the ocean protected by 2030, as essential for being able to protect biodiversity. But one of the big challenges we have is that the public tends to think of this as, as soon as you have an area protected, you know all about it, everything will be fine. But the reality is that it's very difficult for us to document the biodiversity and to be able to track it and understand what's changing. And so establishing baselines is a major challenge, and being able to do that locally and then extend that is a major challenge. So it really requires observation at larger scales than we're used to in environments that we haven't been able to access easily, as Neil talked about, the deepest ocean, the polar ocean, which is changing so quickly. And so we're being helped by two things. One is the advance of technologies that allow us to do actual biological observation, but in new ways. Imaging using the power not only of satellites, but of crowdsourced imaging, imaging of large-scale areas of the ocean, and putting that together sequentially to be able to look at change. Acoustics, being the ocean is actually a very noisy place, and being able to use the sounds that organisms make to identify them and then to be able to track them. And then finally, the various omic techniques that Sara talked a little bit about that really have the potential to revolutionize our ability to detect the fact that organisms are there without having to go out and sample the organisms and bring them back to the lab. So all of this has culminated in moving from the local level to an international level. There's a set of meetings that occurs only once every 10 years called the Ocean Observations Meetings. And last September in Hawaii, the focus of that was, one of the major focus areas of that was extending biological observations beyond what we do locally to the global scale. And the Ocean Obs 19 in 2019 put together an ambitious set of priorities and essentially got the global community interested in biological observation together to identify where, which environments, what tools we need, which instruments we need, and have then passed that on to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development to be the core of a plan for biological observation of the entire ocean over the entire next decade, from starting in January and extending through 2030. We haven't talked about that much yet here, but the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is a framework that allows all of us to be able to nurture ideas at the local level and bring them up to discuss them and get buy-in at the international level. And I think this is a great example of a mechanism that we can use to really leverage what we do at the local level to promote it, to get others to do similar kinds of observations, to build the kind of ocean observation system that we're going to need to not only protect the 30 by 30, but be able to understand what's going on in those protected areas, what's going on in the ocean, and how they're responding to this incredible change from our human impact.
Thank you, Margaret. I know we're really short on time, so Vidar, I want to give you the last word on this topic. How do we scale up?
I want to mention an example from my own country where we started nationally, but where things can really be scaled up globally. And that is about decarbonizing shipping. Climate change is one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss, and noise from shipping is another factor disrupting marine life. We have had a government policy of using public tenders to commission zero and low emission vessels that are part of our road network along our coasts and over our fjords. And that has led to a massive decarbonization, massive electrification of our coastal shipping. Last week, our Ship Owners Association, which is the organization uniting the Norwegian international commercial fleet, which is one of the biggest in the world, came out with a commitment inspired by what they've learned and what they've done at home, that by 2050, they will be carbon neutral. The global IMO target is 50% emission reduction by 2050. They say they will go carbon neutral by 2050. And specifically, they're saying that by 2030, they will order, their members, their ship owners will order only zero emission vessels for their international shipping. So that's an example, a live example of initiatives that are starting nationally, can go globally. What we've seen in Norway is that this has been driving emission reduction, less pollution, but also a lot of innovation. And obviously, when one of the biggest commercial fleets in the world will start ordering only zero emission vessels, that will also unleash a lot of economic opportunity and innovation from engineers and wharfs, etc., around the world.
Thank you, Vidar. That was a very uplifting example to end on. I want to thank our panel for a great discussion today, great set of examples. I know you've all agreed to be available for questions from the audience. I'm sure there will be many as people want to follow up on these wonderful suggestions you've had. So thank you all very much for participating in this panel on partnerships in biodiversity for Capitol Hill Oceans Week. Thanks.